We're live on Facebook. Perfect. And we're live. And our attendees are joining us, which is wonderful. Hi, Joe. It's really nice to have you here. It's been a long time since we've interacted, but it's cool to have you in our audience. So we're just going to give people a little minute to join us because I know that people are coming from various places and sometimes aren't fully here on the dot, so we'll just give them a chance to join us so they don't miss anything. But for those of you who joined us before, it's lovely having you. I can see some very familiar names in the audience there already, which is great. Hi, Joe. Thanks for chatting with us. So attendees, we cannot hear you, but you can obviously hear, I hope, and see us. You can interact with us in the chat. And with that, let's kick things off. A very warm welcome to this TFF live session, up for debate, genetically engineered foods. It's my absolute pleasure to host this with a wonderful panel around us with faces from our TFF community, ambassadors, past TFF teams, and a current TFF finalist, which is really great to have. And we are covering the globe just like we love to do, because we do like to be international. So today's session is going to be an hour and a half long. It's going to be moderated by me. And the way we're going to run things is because this is such a huge topic that can be quite complex at times, we're going to actually start things off with a little presentation first so that I can give you a little bit of background and so that those of us who maybe are not quite as familiar with genetic engineering are fully in the loop of what it is and so they can enjoy the discussion after that. So that will just take not even half an hour, and then we have a full hour after that where we'll engage with our lovely panelists. And of course, we'll also answer any questions that you may have. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen, or put them in the Zoom chat where you can interact with us throughout the conversation as well. And so with that, I would say, let's dive right in. For now, the lovely panelists will listen to me just like before, but you're going to get a chance to get to know them real soon, just after we've all brushed up on our genetic engineering skills. All right, so let's get things going. Here we go. So usually I'm on this just as the TFF community manager. And today I'm loving it because I get to actually speak about a topic that I love and that I actually did a PhD in, which is all about genetic engineering. So I always wanted to understand how agriculture can be made more sustainable. And I really wanted to understand the techniques available to us. So I ended up doing a PhD in that subject. Absolutely loved it. And today I get to talk about it, which makes me really, really happy, and I've been looking forward to the session for a while. So we're going to stay quite high level, but it is, again, just to make this talk accessible to everyone. So right at the beginning, because we are going to start right at the beginning, this is what one of our main crops look like. So panel, because you're the only ones I can hear, do you know what this is?
Teosinte?
Yes, exactly. So it is teosinte, which is a precursor of maize. And so many, many years down the line, it looks like this, right? Some of you might be calling it corn, and probably what you have in mind is more of this yellow cob at the top here than that little thing that you just saw now. And so the way we got to this was through traditional breeding. So what we were doing, we were crossing plants that we liked, and we were keeping seeds from crops that were giving us the kind of seeds and output that we wanted, that were high yielding, that were hardy, for example. We were re-sowing them year on year, and bit by bit, our crops changed to what they are today. So that means that if I wanted to continue with this lovely cob of corn here at the top, I would sow this out next year and keep continuing that cycle and make it change over time by selecting the ones that I want to keep. And so that same way, then, if I wanted to put in a little bit more diversity, I could, for example, come along and cross this beautiful yellow one with this wonderful red one down here. And what I would get is something that has a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. So you will notice in this conversation that I did work on crops before, so my examples are all from the plant science world and from the crop world, but of course a lot of this applies to all of living species as well. And so what happens when we cross things is things that look like this. So for example, at the bottom here we've got our tulips, and it's fair to assume that at some point the parents of these tulips were a red tulip and a yellow tulip, and they were crossed. And what we get are plants that have a little bit of red and a little bit of yellow, but it's completely random how much you're going to get from each parent. So you don't know whether you're going to get a more red tulip or a more yellow one. And so the same happened with the plants at the top, where we can assume that at some point the progeny was pink and yellow, and they were crossed and give us these beautiful flowers now. But what that means is that if I now wanted to end up with a tulip that looked more like this one, so that was mostly yellow with a little bit of red, that would mean that I would make this cross. I would have to select then the plants that had the features that I wanted and keep working with them for a long, long time, so that all of the ones that I sow out at some point will look like that. So everything in agriculture takes a very long time. Generation times are very long, often up to a year long. And so any crop that is on the market today has been bred for at least a decade. And so bit by bit, we started putting in some more advanced techniques in there, because from what we've just seen, the diversity you're going to get is only as much as your two parents are giving you, and you're not going to get anything that is vastly different. So shortly after World War II, we started actually changing some things, and we kind of put the first technique out there, and so that was using radiation in plant breeding. So what you see on the right is one of these plots. So in this lovely circle, you've got different plants grown around it. And what happens is that you then use X-rays of gamma rays to radiate your plants with, which will cause random mutations. And so much like, the sun does this as well. And what you're going to get is mutations in the genome, or different plants coming out at the ends that are vastly different from what you had before. And so this is a way to generate more mutations and to get almost further ahead and to get traits that you didn't have before. So it's a way of increasing the genetic pool. It's a way to get things into your plant breeding materials that you wouldn't have been able to get quite as fast using the common just crossing techniques. And so kind of the next step then in agriculture is that we learned more and more about our DNA. And so I will keep this really high level, but basically, when we think of DNA, we think of this DNA helix, and every living being out there has got DNA that looks exactly like this. And what it is just this sugar phosphate backbone and these four base pairs. So we've got adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, but more often than not, you will just use their first letter to describe them, so A, T, G, and C. And the way we then use the DNA actually is not in this format here, not in the helix format, but what happens when we use it in any application in science is that we break it apart first, so we just use one strand of it. So if we look at the top here, we have a yellow here, so that is a thymine, followed by guanine, followed by thymine again. So if we just took that strand, we'd have a TGT. And so that is basically the language of DNA. So what it would look like then when you actually end up working with it, or when you look at DNA in general, is this. So this over here is a gene that I spent a long time working on during my PhD. And while it looks, it is literally just a series of A, T, Gs, and Cs, that is the makeup of life. So it doesn't matter if you're a bacterium or a plant, a human, a mammal, a bird, your DNA will boil down to this code. And so what that means is that once we understand this code, you can almost read DNA the way you read a book. And what it also means is that, just like with languages, if you're using the same alphabet, depending on the way you order it, you're going to speak a different language. So with the same letters but different orders, I can end up speaking Portuguese, French, or German. And so it's much the same with DNA, where you have these sequences of A, T, Gs, and Cs, and depending on how you order them, you're going to get a different organism, or you're going to get a different protein or different output on the other end. And so the next step then is to leverage that. You understand the code, you can use this to basically make plants create things that you want created, to produce the proteins that you want them to produce. And so we've been using that using different techniques and in different spaces. So actually the first genetically modified bacterium came out in the early 1970s, but it wasn't until 20 years after that, in the early 90s, that we got the first genetically modified plants. And so this was a tobacco plant over in China, and then the first food on the market was what was called the flavor saver tomato that was put on the market in the US. And this tomato lasted a little bit longer, it was a little bit firmer, and tasted a little bit better. And these days, GM crops are available in several countries, not in all, we've got different regulations everywhere. And the way the first uses of GM was that we inserted a foreign piece of DNA, so crossing species boundaries, putting it into a new crop, and that crop would then be a different crop before it would be genetically modified. And so most of the crops out there at the moment that are genetically modified are cotton, such as you can see in this picture here, soybean or maize. And the most common thing out there is herbicide tolerance, maize, cotton, or soybean. And so what that means, so imagine for a second that you're a farmer and you have a field that you plowed, that you looked after really well, it's got really beautiful soil, and you come out and you sow your cotton with really nice spacing in between so that it has space to develop. Now, of course, other plants are going to find that spot really great too, and they're going to grow. And those plants are going to be weeds that you don't want in your field. So there are different ways of removing these weeds. The first is you just go in and take them out manually, which is going to be really tiring and really time consuming as well. So then what we have is chemicals, herbicides. You come in, you put the herbicide on your weed and it dies, meaning that your cotton plant, for example, can continue thriving. And so with this GM, herbicide tolerant cotton, we've gone to the next level where the plants are now tolerant to one specific herbicide. And so what that means is that you can now come in, you can spray your entire field, including your cotton plants. Everything that is not genetically modified will die. So all your weeds are gone and your cotton will continue thriving. The idea behind this is that you spend less time weeding, it's less costly, and the idea is that it's also more sustainable for the environment because you're spraying fewer times than if you were going out one by one getting rid of the weeds. So that was the promise around GM cotton, for example. And so part of it, what I've said, was that you insert foreign material, it's herbicide tolerant, and the promise was that it would be more sustainable. And one of the worries that came in was, what if this genetic material jumped onto other plants? So that now, what if your weeds end up being tolerant to the herbicide as well? So next time you come and spray, actually your weeds are tolerant, they're not going to die. What then? Are you going to use stronger chemicals? How are we going to control any of it out there anymore? So that is one of the big worries around this. So this is kind of looking at an example of where this was used to make our crops higher yielding and more sustainable in the process. Another use of it then is making crops more nutritious. And so this is, I'm going to tell you about the case study of golden rice, which is a humanitarian project that was started over 2 decades ago. You can see it here on the pictures. On the left, you have golden rice that is really yellow in color, so hence the name. The idea here was that especially in Asia, we have many people relying on rice as a staple crop, staple food, but also at the same time, we have many people who are low in vitamin A, which causes a whole range of difficulties. And so a way of like helping that situation was to increase the vitamin content in rice. This would mean that farmers can grow exactly what they always grew. They just grow rice, and the population can eat what they always ate. They always eat just the rice. But the rice is higher in vitamin A, which is perfect for the people, and everybody wins. And so the way you turn rice from its white form, which is on the side of the screen, to its yellow form is by inserting 3 genes from a bacterium, which will affect some of the pathways within the rice, and it will be able to produce the precursor of vitamin A. So this is another use of genetically modification, is looking at the nutritional properties of what we have. So I told you before a little bit of like you insert these genes. The thing is, or you insert this genetic material, and the thing is, you don't know how often it's going to be inserted in your plants, right? It's a very general approach, and it's going to get inserted at various places, and you're unsure how often it will be in there. But you know exactly, you can test very easily to see whether plants have it or not, because you've inserted something from a different species. So it's very easy to do testing to understand what is genetically modified and what isn't. So the other question around these crops was, how do I stop it from spreading? How do I contain what I have where I have it? Because what if we don't want these crops to just be everywhere? So that is where the plant breeding industry came up with a system that is called, they produce hybrid plants. And so hybrid plants are plants that only grow for 1 generation. So basically, if you're a traditional farmer, what you're likely to do is to grow your plants. You would keep some of your seeds. So for example, you would keep some of the rice, you wouldn't sell it, you wouldn't eat it. And instead the next season you would just re-sow it and live off that, right? You're fully sustainable, you're fully just doing your own thing, you're fully in control of what you're growing. But with hybrids, you cannot do that. They will only grow 1 generation. And after that, you can try to re-sow it and things will grow, but they will definitely not yield the same. And so what this means is that you have to buy a new seed every season. And so again, this causes, of course, a reliance on the people who are buying the seed, or who are selling the seeds, which are often large multinationals. And so this is obviously a controversy around here. However, depending on what you're working on, you might have increased yields or increased nutritional benefits, of course, with these GM crops. So there are pros and cons to this. And so this is what we tend to mean by genetic modification. And so recently, we've come up with, or we've developed a new system, and this is what we call then CRISPR-Cas9. You might have heard it before, and this is a gene editing tool. So this is where we go away from genetic manipulation, and we tend to call it gene editing instead. And so CRISPR has got some things that are different from the system that I've just told you about. What you do here is, instead of inserting foreign material that comes in at random places in the genome, and you can't control how many times you have it inserted in the genome, instead of that, you're going to a really controlled system where you'd say exactly where you want a change in your genome to occur. You have that control. You can say exactly right here is where I want to change. And it will only happen there. So that means that you know how often this change has occurred. The other thing is that the setup is slightly different. And so what that means is that the change that you can make in the genome could have happened naturally, right? So if you did breed for a long time, or if you use some of the methods available to us, such as the radiation that I mentioned earlier, you could have very easily gotten to this final product, which is great, but also brings up new questions around regulation. Because if these plants could have been generated through breeding, and if, which is the case, there is no trace of this CRISPR-Cas or of this method that you used, how can you tell it apart from something, how do you tell the genetically engineered plant apart from one that's been done using general breeding methods or crossing methods? And so that is kind of the question around here. Regulation is still discussing this. over here in Europe, so I'm calling from London today, but over here in Europe, it's looking like it's going to be classified just like the genetically modified organisms, which in the EU are not welcome. But other countries are still looking into this because it is a different system. It is going to be much tougher and different to regulate. So that is kind of my super quick background about what you can do with these technologies and with these tools is that you can solve many of the global challenges that we're facing today. And to just throw some of these out there, you know, there are things like the depletion of our soils. So we're seeing that more and more. Traditional, or, you know, the large scale agriculture is really quite taxing on our soils. We're taking nutrients out of it, which is why we have to throw in a lot of fertilizer to replenish the soils. And it's really a system that doesn't look after our environment nicely. Another challenge is that then we have more extreme weather events. So this is droughts, this is more intense storms. This is, you know, our patterns shifting, where our seasons aren't quite the way they were before. And so this causes new stresses on our crops because they have to suddenly deal with new situations. What it also means is that we're having diseases come up that, you know, are stronger or at different times of the year than we did before. And so we need to control for them, which often requires the use of chemicals. It also means that we're having more pests and diseases come out. So these are like the grasshopper here on the pictures, the locusts that were really prevalent this year in East Africa, for example. And then the bigger challenge as well, you know, this is all on the side of growing our food. But on the other end, we're having huge issues with how the food is consumed, how the nutrients that we are getting. And so it's not just people not getting the calories that they need, it's also people not having enough nutritious food that they need. And so we're seeing more and more, first of all, obese people, but also just people who are having micro and macronutrient deficiencies. So if there are ways that we can make our foods last longer, have it more nutritious, or just, you know, increase yields in general in crops so that we have more to give out, that would be a really worthwhile goal. And so some of these techniques can definitely help us get there. And so that's why I'm really excited to have our panel here today with us, who are going to tell us a little bit about how they've used genetic engineering. And just before I launch into that as well, there was a report published just yesterday by the UN that outlined a lot of these challenges, and that actually highlighted the fact that, you know, we need more yields, more foods to feed our world, but we also need to really look at how we can do so healthily and sustainably, because this is an issue that is coming up more and more. So hopefully, I'll stop sharing my screen now so you can see all of us again. So hopefully you are now up to speed with us. You've had a little bit of background on what these tools are and some of the potentials maybe. And so now it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our panel properly. So welcome and thank you for joining me. And I'd love to hear from you, you know, who you are, and maybe what how you've used genetic engineering, or how you come across the farming or these tools before, and maybe throw out, you know, what your opinion is or some background around that. So Olu, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to kick us off?
Okay, cool. Thank you, Mary, for the excellent introductions. My name is Oluwaseyi Shorinola. People call me Olu, so feel free to call me Olu. I am a Nigerian, but I am currently working in Kenya. I did my PhD in plant genetics in the UK, and I worked in the UK for about 3 years working on genetics as well. So I would describe myself as a geneticist. I work primarily on wheat, and what I do is to try to find the genes in wheat that help it to grow better under different environmental conditions. So my work currently in Kenya involves introducing 5 different genes to increase grain yield and resistance to diseases. There's a big problem in Kenyan wheat, which is rust, and I'm trying to work to improve resistance to that disease. Although my work currently doesn't involve genetic engineering, it's more based on conventional breeding. But I have previously worked on genetic engineering, and I was part of the group that demonstrated genome editing, which Mary excellently introduced in Bali as far back as 2015. Regarding my thoughts on genetic engineering, I think it has great potential to deliver the next step change in improving crop productivity, similar to the Green Revolution. Some people are already talking of the gene revolution instead of the Green Revolution now. And I think it's particularly going to be useful for lower and middle income countries, and particularly in Africa. However, I think gene editing or genetic engineering is just one of many tools in the toolbox. So what I mean by that is that we should not be over-reliant on genetic engineering. It is not the only solution to other problems we have in the world. Neither should we neglect it. We shouldn't neglect it. It's definitely a tool that can be applied and can be used in certain contexts. My own concern and my passion is how can we safely and properly introduce genetic engineering to low and medium countries, particularly in Africa. I feel Africa is becoming a battleground for GMO now.
Will you come back?
In a properly regulated manner. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. There's lots there that I'm sure we will dive into, but I want to give you all a chance to introduce yourselves first and tell us a little bit. So Maria, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hello everyone, I'm Maria Fernanda, that's my full name. Well, I have a bachelor degree in agriculture engineering, and since 2007, I have been working with NGOs, and that's how I relate with the smallholders. And since then, I started working with them. So I want to do a specialization or a master relate with organic agriculture, to have that reality in my country. So, well, I'm Peruvian, and here we have the 70% of the agricultures are just smallholders or family farmers. So I really want to help them, work with them, and especially with genetics engineers is I think have a big advantage, because they can see a big pool of genes, but well, related with the accessibility and how affordable the seed will be, that's my concern. So I will really like to see another options, but as Alu said, is not the only solution. So I want to create a solution that can really relate what the farmers, every type of farmers really need, and not just force them to use a general solution. That's what I think.
Beautiful, thank you. Mickey, do you want to go next, please? Okay.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Mikhaela Neequaye. Marie will constantly refer to me as Mickey, that's fine. First of all, I'd like to thank Thought for Food for having me. I am a plant geneticist, so I have recently acquired my PhD in crop genetics from Norwich, and I'm based here in the UK. And my research is primarily focused on looking at nutritional value, specifically looking at the genes that regulate how broccoli accumulates nutritional compounds. So during my PhD, I was quite fortunate in that I worked with a line known as super broccoli, and I got to work with a crop that was conventionally bred, which is one of those kind of first generation technologies that Marie was talking about. And then as my project developed, I got to collaborate with other scientists, including the BRACT team in Norwich, and I developed a gene edited broccoli, which, you know, following the decision 2 years ago, in fact, yeah, July 2018, where the EU ruled that gene edited, so CRISPR-Cas9 crops would be regulated as GMOs, we were the first to coordinate to submit an application and be processed by DEFRA here in the UK to carry out a CRISPR field trial. So I have a bit of experience with that as well, and with the policy involved in that. General opinion from me is that I'm very, very pro using gene editing. Coming from my position in academia, is that there's such a beautiful wealth of knowledge that hardworking scientists have been putting together for years. And now these technologies are really the platform where we can take what we know with these tools and start to really take on some of these global challenges that are affecting our food and feed sources. So that's me.
Beautiful. Thank you. And the way you've rounded it off, actually, I will go to Shreya next, because you said feed sources. And Shreya, that is your in.
Hi, so I'm Shreya. I study biology, and also I work in like a very early stage startup where we are engineering bacteria to make sustainable omega-3 as a possible replacement feed source for aquaculture. So hopefully make that whole industry a little bit more sustainable and reduce its impact, and maybe even increase the nutritional value of the end product. So as like from my position, obviously I'm pretty pro genetic engineering, and as we learn, as we find new techniques to engineer various organisms and learn more about genomes, I'm really excited to see what solutions the whole scientific community at large comes up with that we can actually use in the real world.
Perfect. And I will drop your name out there. She's working with SyntheSea, that is a TFF finalist this year in our current cohort. And now we're here to hear from a previous TFF finalist. So Prateek, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Prateek. I've been based between India and France in the US for a few years. I have a master's in synthetic biology. And I've been trained in interdisciplinary natural sciences for many years before that. So I'll give a quick introduction to how we were introduced to the TFF. I think that'll give people a brief outline to what TFF is as well. I don't know if that's needed though, but so TFF organizes this annual challenge every year that is called the TFF challenge basically, and Shreya is a finalist this year. We were a finalist in 2016. And we were with this company called Unibiome. We founded this venture where we were genetically modifying bacteria to make them produce vitamins as a byproduct of fermentation. So you can imagine it like a second generation's baker's yeast, let's say. So instead of using a typical yeast to make your bread, you use this enhanced yeast to make your bread, and then your bread automatically contains more vitamins in it. So the idea was that, you know, that like a lot of emphasis around food security was towards calories. But, you know, imagine a world where you can grow an unlimited amount of rice, an unlimited amount of wheat or any crop, but that is not going to solve your problem because micronutrients are super important as well. And so this was a way to convert plain simple rice, but you ferment rice and then you turn it into a complete nutrition because you can modify bacteria to produce any number of micronutrients into it. So that is the idea behind Unibiome basically. And obviously I'm pro genetic engineering. I mean, I guess if I were to make a blanket statement, I would say that it's a very powerful technology. And just like any powerful technology, it's not that you cannot do bad things with it. I mean, of course, you can do bad things with genetic engineering as well. And therefore saying a blanket statement like, oh, genetic engineering is bad, and like, you know, like for instance, EU putting a blanket ban on anything genetically modified, it just, I mean, it just like plain stupid. I think that, you know, that like you cannot put a blanket ban because you can potentially make like lives of billions of people much easier using this technology. So just do not use like blanket terms around it, you know, study everything on a case-to-case basis, and, you know, some things could be good, some things could be bad, and then, you know, take them on their merit. That's what I feel.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And especially, Prateek, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but your startup was in France, where of course regulation is quite tight, and then did lead you to pivots because you couldn't get around it, right? Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that as well, please?
Right. I think that's an important part as well. So basically, we were using also CRISPR, but also classic genetic engineering methods like homologous recombination in yeast as well. And so our products were going to be genetically modified. So in almost all of the jurisdictions that we were supposed to work with, which was going to be developing countries, because, you know, malnutrition is a major problem in developing countries. So India was one of the targets because I live in India, and Bangladesh was one of the targets because one of our co-founders was Bangladeshi. And we saw that, India has so far just allowed one crop, that is the BT cotton with the insecticide resistance in it, insecticide in it basically. And then this was a huge problem for us. I mean, and not in terms of just regulations, but to raise venture capital around it, and anything was just becoming so difficult because every time the investor would ask, so how are you going to get around the regulations? And then we would have to outline a path that would go, like 10 years down the line with, all the regulatory timelines and field trials that we would have to do. And lot of traditional venture capitalists who exit in 4 years, they would just back out. This is not for us. I mean, funnily enough, in TFF we won the Impact Award, basically the Kirshner Foundation's Impact Award, which is like given to startups which might not generate a lot of revenue, but will have a huge impact in a longer term. So due to all these things, basically we had to eventually pivot to doing non-genetically engineered microbes that produce antioxidants instead of vitamins. And then we came up with some other technologies using CRISPR-Cas9, where we would be making bacteria that would, just finding, legal loopholes, essentially, finding legal loopholes where you could make bacteria that would not be classified as GMOs, but yeah, they are GMOs, but, you just have to it's frustrating that you have to go through all these legal loopholes and everything and focus on this instead of, doing lab work as a scientist. And
yes.
Anyway,
For sure.
so we had to pivot away from, using GMOs from microbes, as Marie said.
Yes, which is, I'm sure, fates that quite a few startups over here in the EU face. In the US, regulations are a little bit different. And in fact, just this week, a startup over there raised $50 million, including from the Canadian government, to do alternative, genetically engineered way of producing ice cream and like lactose compounds or products such as yogurt and ice cream that don't derive from the cow at all. So there are countries that are more and more open to this, and they're getting regulation to come in and to support startups in that field, although over here in Europe, there are still many hurdles on that way. I like the way that you're all saying there are other tools out there, and I will dive into that a little bit. But I want to start first because this is where, TFF is all about sustainably feeding the world. And so we've touched on the nutrition, we've touched on making aquaculture more sustainable, and on ways to make perhaps increase yields using these techniques. So I really want to ask, how do you think these tools can support us in having a more sustainable food system? And so remember, this is not just how we grow the crops, but also then how we feed people on the other end so that everybody is fed and healthy as well. So maybe Mickey, do you want to go first? Because yours does have a direct effect on the people on the other end.
I'm happy to answer. So just coming from my perspective in, looking at nutritionally enhanced or nutritionally fortified broccoli, and also in the other CRISPR field trial, which was put out just before ours, which was regulated, was Rothamsted research. It was Jonathan Napier's research in camelina, who's also looking at fortifying that for camelina for oleic acids. And what I think the important thing about these technologies in terms of utilizing them for this food and feed system and for nutritional enhancement is we have a background, we have a lot of knowledge about how we have previously fortified food. So for example, super broccoli, a breeding process to develop that took, over 20 years, and I'm here in 2020 still kind of doing my PhD and researching it, or I was until recently. Whereas the gene edited broccoli, which was a change in a gene, the same as what had been done in 20 years in breeding, we did from conception to field in about 3 years, which just gives you an idea of the the timeline change, the human effort change, the financial change that this gives us in terms of thinking about, okay, you know, we are facing an aging population, we are facing a population that does have these macro and micronutrient deficiencies, and we have food and we have an agricultural system in place where we simply need to tweak the genes in order to make them just maybe that little bit healthier, have a little bit more of this compound or a little bit more of that. You can change a gene through breeding. We've done that. It takes a long time. It costs a lot of money. It's doable, and it definitely should be part of our feed systems, but you can also make a change in that same gene in a few years. And that is the revolution that I'm hoping, as Olu says, you know, this gene revolution that allows us to really take our food forward in terms of not only fortifying it, but taking a lot of what I think is important in this and in this discussion of sustainability is not everyone can afford to spend 20 years making a crop or a line to commercialize, the way that these technologies do also give us a platform, or at least a way in which people that don't have the time, resources or efforts that they traditionally have, if you want to go through the breeding pathway, you might have those resources. You might be a smallholder, you might be a smaller research facility who can start really using these technologies to address some of these major problems. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just to check that I understood, so it's cheaper to use the genetic engineering route because it's so much shorter in terms of time frame than using kind of the traditional breeding, just because it would take you so much longer to get it on the market.
I mean, there is a discussion around, you know, how much people can afford to spend on paying what will have to be experienced geneticists and providing lab facilities, which, you know, there is definitely a cost involved in that. If you're an established, you know, larger corporation, you don't have these problems, for example, the way you do if you're a smaller holder who can do breeding experiments quite easily on a small farm, definitely. But in the long term, it does reduce some of that sort of bottleneck that tends to happen with time and money in relation to developing these crops.
Perfect. I will add to that as well that the time to then get through regulation can still add another 5 years or so on the process, right? Like to get from your final produce, like your final crop that you are ready to put out there, you still have a few years of field trials before it's actually on the market. That's for any crop out there. But I do love this point, and I will say that actually, you know, the costs of doing these experiments are going down drastically, which is beautiful, and which we're seeing in our entrepreneurs as well, who more and more are actually able to use these tools where they are, don't require really fancy lab setups. And so what my view is that more and more people are just going to be using this or able to use this technology where they are, as opposed to having to pay, you know, really experienced people in a really like big lab with all of the machinery to do these things. So hopefully it'll become a tool of the people quite soon as well. And the other thing as well is that as we're doing this, we can create new things, and we can also have, I'm going to name drop another team that we're working with at the moment, but GrowCab, for example, that are they're using speed breeding to reduce times of crops that need to grow, so that we can reduce generation times, so we can speed up breeding, whether you're starting from conventional breeding or other methods. But there are ways to reduce this time and to get these things in the market faster. Olu, I believe you wanted to jump in here.
Yes, certainly. And I think the key word you used there is sustainability. And when we considering sustainability, we shouldn't just look at the technology itself, but we should look at the technology within a context. And there are two contexts I want to point out mainly. That's the context of the problem and the context of the people that you're targeting this technology towards. Now, there are certain problems that the only way you can sustainably address them is through genetic engineering. A good example is, for example, the wheat rust, we think. So we've been battling wheat rust for millennia, definitely. Because what happens is that plants have this innate resistance to rust. So they have these innate genes within them, natural genes within them that confers resistance to rust, but the rust pathogen keeps evolving and keeps overcoming this resistance. So there's this arm race where the pathogen and the plant are just battling it out, basically. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing that for many years, and we've not been able to have a permanent, a very sustainable solution out there. Now, one way in which you can sustainably deal with that problem is by stacking multiple resistance genes together, so that the pathogen is not just fighting against one resistant gene in the plant, but is fighting against a combination of resistant genes. And the best way you can do that is through genetic engineering. So my work currently involves stacking multiple resistant genes, but not through genetic engineering. But there's that off chance that the genes you're stacking together could separate. And later down the line, maybe 10 years down the line, you come back to the same problem of rust again. So I think within the context of a problem, some problems are best addressed using genetic engineering. But I would say that it must also be considered within the context of the people as well too. Now, I think scientists, including myself, we sometimes bias towards technology. So once we find a technology, we're looking for where we want to throw that technology out and just use that technology. But I think for any technology to be sustainably adopted, it must be developed in proper consultation with the people that we are targeting into us. Because then you're going to have a high rate of adoption at the beginning, but over time, the rate of adoption might just drop. Maybe because the people are looking for something different to what you are offering them. And so the rate of adoption might drop. So I think those two things are really important, the problem and the people that you're targeting it with.
Yes, I love that point. We've had this come up in a discussion in a roundtable like this before, where we were saying that instead of having, this was a model in a startup that was, I don't know, they had a really cool phrase with it that I wish I remembered right now, but the way they were saying it is basically that instead of having the companies and the people throw things at farmers and our users, they were developing a system where it was the other way around, where instead it was the farmers telling us what they need. And Maria, I'd love your opinion on this. You mentioned this right at the beginning when you introduced yourself, but you mentioned kind of the traditional farming techniques. You even said, like, let's make something that works for the farmers. So how can we include them in our decision making? How can we make sure that scientists or that large multinational companies that are developing these things understand what it is that the farmers need?
Well, thanks. You took the topic, Olu. I really want to talk. Well, I think the principal point is we always need to understand how they live, how they farm, how they produce, especially because for them, the farm is not a business. For them, is their lifestyle. So we really need to think, if we are going to improve a crop, how we are going to do it. If that crop is what the farm really needs, or if that crop is, for example, a really marketable crop, but the farmer will have access to that market. So we really need to consider, especially here in Peru, we have especially in the highlands, they live really far from the cities. So when we were talking about hybrid seeds, and about you mentioned, Mary, they only is you can save the seed. So I think that's a really problem for them, because they don't have access to the market. So it will be really difficult for them to have access to that market. And so I think that's the principal point about what Mikhaela said about the nutrition properties. I like that idea. I have been heard it. And also in Peru, we have project related with quinoa, potatoes, because we also have low nutrition problems here in Peru. So it's a reality we have to deal with, but also we need to make it sustainable, as you said. And also about the money. They don't have a lot of money, especially when you create a utopic idea. Oh, you can produce a lot of these, and then how they can sell it. So we need to consider they not only produce one crop, they produce multiple crops, associations, and especially they don't need to disturb their own ecosystems. That's what I really want to make a point. We need to consider the deal as an ecosystem and not only a produce area.
Yes, I love that. Systems thinking is something we like at TFF as well, quite a lot. Thinking of the whole thing, holistic ways of thinking, and bringing this to all of everything we're doing. It fits into, of course, regenerative agriculture as well, where instead of finding ways to give back to the soil as well, so that we're not reducing the nutrient levels in the soil, but that we're actually increasing them. And this could, of course, launch us down a whole other route that we could go down, where, you know, how does genetic engineering fit with organic farming, and is it actually, you know, is it mutually exclusive, or does it come together? But I think that is a whole other discussion in itself.
Yes.
But I do love that, and also the comment you made about some people just physically won't have access to it because they are so remote, I think is a really good thing to consider, and to not lose them. Yes, Prateek.
I just wanted to make a comment about the money issue and smallholder farmers that Maria made. I think that's a very important issue, that, you know, we say that these large multinational companies hold monopolies over these seeds, and then they charge exorbitant prices to farmers. And I think that was the case, or maybe still is the case, but like at least was the case up until now with these technologies, when these technologies were very expensive. And, you know, as Mikhaela said, that, you know, you had to hire these experienced geneticists, etc. And, you know, and the labs would need to be in universities or in only large corporations, etc. But with the reduction in genetic engineering methods, and with the cost of reduction in, you know, genetic engineering methods, sequencing being very cheap, primers, everything, you know, synthesis, DNA synthesis, and etc., and everything being super cheap, I think that's when these small companies have risen up as well. And now I think we can like break this stronghold of these multinational corporations and have a true competition in the market, where a lot of small companies can also come in, and, you know, and then once there will be competition in the market, the prices will, you know, obviously go down, because when you have two companies, you know, monopolizing everything, then, you know, they can charge whatever they want for the invention. But when there are like 1,000 companies competing, then, you know, obviously the prices are going to go down. And I think that's just wanted to make a comment about that, that I think that like that is going to change going into the future with, you know, reduction in the cost of the genetic engineering methodologies.
Yes, I would agree with that. But of course, again, I think the hurdle at the moment is just the regulatory process as well, and just the time, which you've seen as your startup as well. But I do think it is a great comment to make here as well. I'm seeing lots of questions come in the Q&A, which is really exciting, and we are going to start tackling them as well. So if you have questions, keep them coming. I see some are directed at a specific member of the panel, so do that as well if you have questions around that. I think this is a question that I want to pull out here from Nikita, that we touched on almost. How can we convince consumers that GMOs are not harmful, in fact that they have benefits? And so then how can we convince the farmers maybe to buy these crops? How can we convince consumers to buy products such as what Unibiome was producing, Prateek? Do you have any experience talking to people about this? I think Prateek, you're
Yeah, I mean, we do. And I think an important point that needs to be made here is, I think there are two levels of charges against GMOs in the world. Like, one is this biocontamination issue that the scientists have. And I think that is something that even I, as, you know, a very pro GMO person, buy, that, you know, that yes, there is some argument to be made there, that biocontamination is something that, you know, you need to be aware of. And when people say that do not mess with self-replicating machines, there is some level of like merit in that argument, although we have been messing up messing with self-replicating machines for, a really, really long time. And as you showed, your examples as well, and with radiation, you cross chromosomes and thousands of genes, get transferred. And although now, as Mikhaela said, that, you can go and edit just one particular gene, and that is, so much more precise than older methods of, chromosomal transfers and irradiations and everything. So there's one that is one charge that, is put against GMOs, and that is mostly the European Union's charge against GMOs. But there's another charge that consumers have, is basically that GMOs aren't safe. That GMOs are somehow just bad for you, bad for everyone, bad for the environment, and that charge has absolutely no merit. Like, that charge has like no merit at all. I mean, I was at the Reducitarian Summit sometime in 2018, and the new CEO of Soylent. So Soylent, the company which sells food replacement beverages, basically. Mm-hmm. And so they are one of the companies that are very proudly, publicly pro-GMO. So they write on their labels, like, proudly made with GMOs. That is very refreshing to see. But he made, in a room full of people, he asked them that, how many of you believe in climate change? And then, a lot of people raised hands. And then, how many of you believe that GMOs are safe? And, and very few people raised hands. And then he said that, that 97% of the scientists tell you that, climate change is, human made. And the same 97% of scientists also tell you that GMOs are safe, but, somehow, we believe one thing and we do not believe the other thing. So I think that distinction needs to be made, that biocontamination, okay, there's some merit to it, but the safety, there's absolutely no merit to that argument that GMOs GMOs are, are unsafe for anybody to consume, basically. There's like no data on it at all. All the data in the last 25 years or so shows that GMOs are absolutely safe for consumption. And I think that data needs to be somehow represented to people. And we need to, I don't know, somehow.
It needs to be better communicated. Yes.
Yeah, stop supporting, these non-GMO approved products or whatever, non-GMO project, etc., which is now flooding the market so much that, in the US, I felt like there's no option to buy GMO. Like, it seemed like that everything in the supermarket was just non-GMO approved, and it seemed like that it was just, the new fad out there.
Yes, well, depending on where you are, products have to be labeled GM or they don't. So that will depend where you are regionally as well. But it is a big part of it. Shreya, I think you wanted to jump in here as well.
So I don't think I really have a solution to this beyond better communication, but I think it is interesting to think about like the differences in public attitude to genetic engineering with like medicine and medical products like penicillin, which are just as genetically engineered as food would be, but there doesn't seem to be that kind of immediate revulsion about it. And in fact, genetic engineering was kind of portrayed as this solution to so many diseases, but not as a solution to hunger or drought resistance or any other challenges that we might face.
For sure. Mickey, you're probably going to say what I'm thinking. Go for it.
I probably am, yeah. I completely agree. I would say from a personal perspective, when I've had these discussions, is that I find, and I get it, it's very easy to say, oh, people who are anti-GMO are idiots and they're this and whatever. And food is a really personal thing. Like, food is so emotional for people. It's a lot harder to tie words like technology and editing to something that you hold so dear to yourself, the way that you don't, for example, defibrillators and penicillin and mobile phones and the internet and everything else that's revolutionized the way that we interact with the world. And food is one of the key ways that we interact with the world. It's very understandable how people have gotten to this very, passionate response. I think it is wrong, but I get it. I don't like just kind of painting them with the brush of idiots. I will say in my own discussions when I've been talking about the, the gene edited broccoli and that kind of thing, is Kathy Martin, who's at the Journalist, always makes a really great point, and I love it, which is, medicine is sick care. It's what you turn to when you're already poorly. Food is healthcare. The way that you take care of yourself and the way that you think about food is how you keep yourself healthy. So if we can start to reframe the language around these technologies to think about innovations in health, innovations in allowing people access to more food that don't have access to it, to better nutrients, to food that's more sustainable. I think a lot of anti-GMO people, when I have engaged with them, we kind of end up being on the same side almost, which is people should care about where their food comes from. They should care about what's in it. They should care that it's sustainable. They, you know, it's important to think about these things the way that we and the, you know, non-GMO people who are anti-GMO argue. And a way around that is to say, you know, technology has revolutionized so much about our lives. It is just another way that we can take better care of ourselves. It's just another way that we can really make health more accessible to more people. And so that's what I would say would be a really important part of the discussion. Yeah.
I love that little analogy there that you just mentioned around the health and the sick care. Maria, I think you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, but when we're talking about information, I think that's the most important thing. We need to inform the people, especially, for example, if I were not an agronomist, my family will never know that the plants also needs pesticide to protect from the pests, and the overuse and the overdosing, the normal or conventional agronomy, farming here in Peru is. Especially, I always try to inform with that, and also I can say that if people accept that they use pests, the GMOs cannot be in the same way if you put it next to organic agriculture. Because when people buy organic agriculture is because you certify that is completely natural. That's the what they're looking for. So I think that information and make it accessible for everyone is really important, because I also have been hearing about GMOs related with cancer or other stuffs or mutant plants. Yeah, I think it's really that you need to assure that it's not happening. And so, yeah, that's a point related with my point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Prateek, did you want to jump in here? And Olu?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point to Mikhaela that, you know, that when people say that, you know, they have a right to know where their food comes from, do you think that people would be happy to know that their food has been irradiated with X-rays, you know? And I think I feel like that's a very strong an argument that, you know, that like we do so many things to our food that, you know, that I don't know if, I mean,
Well, yes, let's open the conversation and tell them about, I mean, they should know what is allowed at the moment. It's just that we don't talk about it. And the companies have started to like pick up one thing.
So many quote unquote horrible things, you know, are allowed in organic agriculture. Mm-hmm. And you know, and the naturalist fallacy and everything that is natural is good, and you know, all these toxins and you know, like nature doesn't care about you at all. Like nature will kill you. Like nothing about nature is, you know, good or bad per se. And so what do you think about it? You know, this argument that people have a right to know about their food, would they be happy with knowing, you know, that irradiated with X-rays?
Well, I think that they should know it. It's one of the topics I just learned because I'm an agronomist, especially with the strawberries here in Peru, because they are really near to soil. They overuse everything that they know. And it's a common issue. And also, for example, I have been working in a conventional agriculture area, but I was working on an organic greenhouse. So I was always walking around, and the people were really like, oh my God, she's really young, what she's doing here. And I was talking with them, and they mentioned it about they produce and how, and I always like to learn everything about conversion agriculture. So I interact with them, and they told me they have headaches before they applied, or they have some issues related with that. So I think organic agriculture, it can be a solution because it's like you don't have that fear to overuse pesticides. It's not, I think I'm against with the idea that, oh no, organic agriculture is more nutrition or have more nutrients, because it's not that case. It's the same fruit, but it assure you that it's not used with pesticides. So people need to know about it. Once I was talking with a farm, and he said why the organic farmers should verify that our product is like organic, and why the conventional agriculture doesn't have a certification where you can see, oh, I apply this and apply this, this, and this. So I think that people should know. Yeah.
I agree. Knowledge is power, always. I love that as a young person, you just went out there and showed them. TFF is very much about that as well. What I want to say to that is that the communication that is going out there is not equal on both sides, right? We have clear parties who are waging a war against some of these things, who are communicating about some of these aspects and are not talking about the entire picture, which is why then, of course, people only see one side of it. So for example, they're learning about how terrible GMOs are, whether that's true or not. And they're not hearing about the methods that are available that we are currently using for the foods that are non-GMOs, such as radiating the food, or the plants before that. And the other thing about organic farming, even though I didn't want to go into this too much today, but here we are, which is also great, is that I think depending on where you are, organic can mean different things. And it's been a messaging that's been really like supported by various parties. Can mean different things. If we're talking about organic where like nothing at all is applied to the crop, beautiful. But in many countries, organic means that we've banned some of the synthetic fertilizers, but we're actually allowed to use natural compounds that are like vastly more toxic to the environment than anything that is synthetically made. And so that is why in some places then there is the question of whether organically certified produce is actually better for the environment. And of course, on the consumer side, consumers want to be, they want to help the environment. They want to save the bees. They want to help the pollinators. They want to look after the soils. Maybe the soils not so much, but the bees. And so they're buying that because they want to do good, but it doesn't mean necessarily that on the other end, we're getting out what we need. And so that is an entire story that needs unpacking. I am loving the comments in the chat and the questions that are coming in. So yes, I think Ariella, I did just answer your question without reading it beforehand, but there you go. She was asking whether organic growers are allowed to use any pesticides or not. So depending on where you are, they are allowed to use some that can be a lot more toxic than some of the synthetic ones that are not allowed using those methods. Thank you.
I would just like to add as an important point, which I think Prateek and Maria have touched on, is that organic doesn't necessarily have to be detached from GM. So when you're looking at gene editing, when we think about organic, the way that the term organic has been marketed, it is not the way that organic necessarily is referred to by farmers or by scientists. So we all have three completely different definitions. But from a scientific perspective, and I would say, in terms of agriculture, if you can modify a crop so that it requires less fertilizer because it's better at sucking up sulfur, that is organic. You don't then have to apply that nutrient in order for the crop to get it, because it's going to do it for itself. If you can make a tweak in a crop so that it is better at interacting with its natural environment so that you don't have to add supplements to its natural environment, that is organic. That was just my point.
That was really nicely explained. Prateek.
Oh yeah, absolutely excellent point. I think that, and especially when you're talking about smallholder farmers, then, I mean, if you want, let's say, no pesticides, and then and then if you can integrate the pesticide gene inside of cotton, as they've done in BT cotton, like how beautiful that is, that that you do not have to use any pesticides, and then it just ingrained into the gene of the plant itself, and then no pesticides. And I think there are these two spectrums, like two ends of the spectrum. That one is where you overuse your soil, overuse a lot of fertilizers, pesticides, and everything, and you completely ruin your soil, for any further usage. And then the other end is, when people go towards this like completely organic side, where they completely stop using any new technology that has been developed in the last 200 years, etc. And then they want to, farm using, very old methods. And one is organic this way, that that is just old methods, and one is this super intensive agriculture where you ruin everything. And I think we need to meet somewhere in between. And I think a new term should be coined, like sustainable agriculture rather than organic agriculture. And I think that sustainably, like if something you tell me that is sustainably grown, whether or not you've used GM crops in it or not, I think that should be the ideal thing, like, and not tie your hands behind your back using the organic methods, and and not being able to do certain things which will actually benefit the communities and the consumers and everybody as a whole.
Yes, I love that point. Maria.
Yeah, I completely get it. I think the same. We need a matches of everything, because I really liked about the genetic engineer, because, well, plant breeding is have like every farmer knows about it, because every farm knows what crop is better from their own land or their own reality, or because of the taste of their culture, tradition. So just because it produces better, and well, we can see that more clearly with fruits, because you don't need to, the asexual reproduction is more helpful, sorry. But I'm more related with annual crops, so I'm more emphasis with the seed. With the seed, we need to, I know everything is a market and you need to make a customer loyalty and all that, but you are dealing with traditions and the decision of the farmer where he can put the seed, or where how many times he can use it. So I also agree, because the genetic engineer is faster than any plant breeding you can use, but it's a point of view of knowledge. Because if you inform that, and also obviously the common idea is everything that is not natural is conventional, or just a market or agro-industry. And so in my case, I consider that organic agriculture, it will help in local market, because you can't also, like, it will be this really utopic not to consider that you can produce, I don't know, like 20 hectares of different crops just for organic, because it's like almost impossible. But also with organic, I can see that they have a lot of specifications, and also the definition that Mikhaela used, yeah, is true, because you don't use external sources. That's the principal idea, not to use external sources. So yeah, it's true. But also you can see the difference of agroecology and organic agriculture, because organic agriculture, it can be just one crop, but you don't use any pesticides or any fertilizer. But agroecology is to create a diversity, and also helps the ecosystem to just the man just help it, but not overuse it. You help the ecosystem to grow by itself, but you also can use it to produce.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I think we need a medial point of view, because it's also a market and people who doesn't produce who need to eat. And it will be really nice to see a middle. Yeah.
Yes, bringing everything together. Olu, you want to jump in, I think.
I want to make 3 points here. And I think what we're trying to do is not to defame organic agriculture. I know so often organic agriculture have been put against some of these latest technologies. But a good example is a prominent scientist in the US, Pamela Rowland. She's a big professor of biology and genetics in the US, and she's a proponent of genetic engineering. But her husband is actually an organic farmer. So you have within the same house, an organic farmer working alongside a professor of genetic engineering. And they've been able to find ways of making it work. So actually, the two can work side by side. And on the subject of information and informing farmers, I think this whole question is about how do we convince consumers that GMO is safe for them. I think we need to present the evidence to them. I think we make a mistake sometimes, which is to assume that farmers or people are stupid or they're foolish. They can't understand what scientists understand. We think scientists are the only ones that should understand things. And maybe that's why I slightly disagree with Prateek that if 97% of scientists say climate change is real, you should also believe that 97% of scientists say GMO foods are safe. I'm a scientist and I believe scientists, but I also believe that people can reason as well and can make up their mind. So what we should do is to present the evidence to them, and the correct evidence, the right information, and let them make up their mind about it. And also, we shouldn't do this once we finish developing the product. I think that's one trend I see these days, that we develop the product and then we now give them the information. I think we should inform them all along the process, even for developing the product, is that people are comfortable with what they understand, basically. So they've known about plant breeding for years. Their grandfather have painted crossing a bean variety and they got something out of it. So they're comfortable with what they understand. And I believe once people start understanding what goes into genetic engineering, more people will be open and receptive to it. Now, my final point would be that I think the biggest problem for genetic engineering is that it got off to the wrong start. That's my own personal opinion. Maybe some startup company might disagree with me. I think that genetic engineering started with Monsanto was a big problem. I don't know if there are any Monsanto people on the platform. Apologies if there are. I'm not saying Monsanto is an evil company, no. But I'm saying that the precedents that was set with Monsanto where sometimes these GMCs were overpriced and farmers always have to go back to buy this GMC. I think that's a problem that genetic engineering is still reeling from today. And there was some false publication at the beginning that showed that GM wasn't safe, but I think some of this has been refuted. What I would like to see is to see genetic engineering in the hand of public or public-private partnership. I want to see a GM that is going forward with humanitarian causes where farmers don't have to pay more than what they're paying for the conventional seeds they're getting. They don't have to be pushed out of the market and they can easily have access to the seeds. And I'm hoping perhaps some of the startups we have on TFF can pioneer some of this initiative.
Ah, beautiful, Olu. Yes. So TFF innovators out there, listen up. We want some solutions from you, but it does lead to a final question that I want to ask because we are running out of time before I ask you to wrap up. This has been coming in a number of questions in the Q&A. So for example, Abhinav has asked, how do you feel about people like owning and patenting the GMOs? And so we've touched on this by saying, where does the money go and how is it accessible? But at the end of the day, at the moment, it's a very closed system where you patent your GMO and your way of doing things, and it's not accessible. And so Prateek mentioned, what if we open this up? But I kind of want to challenge you as a panel to say, how do you see a system work where we can make it accessible, where we get rid of the patenting, and let's build a beautiful universe where all of this comes together, where all these things are accessible? What would that look like? Prateek, I'm going to pick on you first.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, so when we started Unibiome, it was called peer-to-peer probiotics. And the idea was basically this, that it was going to be open source and anybody would be able to share the thing between their peers. And, that's how it would grow. Basically, no patents over it, no intellectual property over it. And that was the idea. And I'm very sympathetic to the cause. Like, I also run this foundation called Open Source Pharma Foundation, where we are challenged with the same cause that, that these drugs are overpriced, and then can you make them open source? And I think that is a perennial problem that, some innovator invests years into developing something and they want a reward out of it. Like, and then that reward, do you want to reward them with a monopoly exclusivity, with a patent, or can you give them a prize, or can you develop a good open source model around it? And I think, we haven't really seen a very powerful open source model in tangible things so far. Like, we've seen some really good models in the software side, but we haven't seen anything in the tangible side so far. And, I'm open to hearing from everybody out there that, what could be a great open source model to that still rewards the innovators. I think that is a crucial point, because, a lot of activists then make it sound like that, oh, you develop something, using years of your time and money and research, and then just give it away for free. Yes, you can do that if you made that with university grants, etc., or NIH grants, etc. But, once you are in the business scene, then, it becomes really hard to, just invest years of research into something and then give it away for free. And that disincentivizes people to, develop anything further. So I think a good open source model really needs to be put out there, and I'm all ears to hear something about it. I don't have a very good tangible answer to it, to be honest. And let's see what the other commentators have to say.
Yeah, who wants to build on this?
I think a good model is the golden rice model, where a technology that's originally, the transformation technology and the likes, was originally patented, but it was used in such a way that it was done in a public-private sector partnership. And this means that the seeds can be made available to farmers at a rate that they would normally get their conventional seeds. And also there are other models as well. For example, in Africa, there is what is called the ISA. I've forgotten the full meaning of the acronym, but what they do basically is they look for opportunities where GM can be applied in Africa. And if such technology are patented, they try to negotiate for maybe a patent-free way of allowing farmers to access that technology. So patenting itself is not the problem, but now we should begin to move away from sole concentration of this technology in the hands of the private sector. I think, as we've all alluded to, some of these things are becoming cheaper and easier. And so now universities or international research organization in partnership with the private sector. Part of my PhD, I worked a lot with the private sector. I did some research that the private sector took up. So there's a lot of scope for private-public sector partnership to actually advance some of the scopes. And also it's important to know that some of these new technologies are actually easy to approach now without patenting, like genome editing, CRISPR-Cas9. Although there is a little bit of patenting in it, but it's quite accessible to everyone now because it was developed within the public realm. And so I think as this gets more advanced, we've only talked about CRISPR-Cas9, but there are other forms of genome editing that I imagine now. So this field is rapidly evolving. And so it's going to be, patent in the future is not going to be as much a problem as it is when it was started by Monsanto. I'm not against Monsanto again, if anyone is from Monsanto, but it's just that concentrating power in any one company, in whatever company it is, it's such a dangerous thing. And so we shouldn't allow that to happen again.
Yes, agreed. I once heard, and I really like this phrase, that if Monsanto had instead, or any company, had instead made golf, like grass for golfing that stayed greener for longer, people would have embraced GM instantly. Which, yeah, but they went down the food route, which, as we've heard today, is an emotional subject. And so got held up on there. So we are coming to the end, but Maria, let's give you a little bit of time to add on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, about the question, I will really think that we need to give sources to the farmers and let them decide what the best, not to force them how it's happening the years before, to force to completely change the traditions of view or how they used to produce. And I consider that every tool will help. And maybe that's how we can kind of like, I forget the word, but kind of like a specific, every farmer had their own specific style, so everyone can have access to the market and not create for example, a big country just for one crop. So every solution needs to give them the freedom to decide what is best, not to force them to do what is new or what is in, just because they want to gain a lot of money.
For sure. Thank you for adding on that. So I like to end by maybe challenging you a little bit. I'd like to round it off by asking you for one word that outlines what you think the future of genetic engineering in our society is, and one word on like a specific topic that we need to bear in mind as we go forward. Does that make sense? Who wants to go first? Shreya, you're nodding. You're up.
Okay. Well, I guess one word that I'd be genuinely concerned about would be biocontamination. So gene drives, okay, well, that's more than one word. And one word to sum up the potential of genetic engineering would be sustainability. I think that's where the focus should be.
Love it. Cool. Olu?
I need to get my dictionary out. One word, that's tough. I would say one word to sum up the genetic engineering for me would be potential. There is so much potential in this, and we can take it whichever direction we want. And then with that also comes responsibility. So that would be my other word. So we need to use it responsibly. Yeah.
All right, potential responsibility. I like it. Mickey?
That's a hard one to follow because that's pretty perfect. So my one word to describe these technologies would be innovation. And I think the word that I would follow that with is equality. It has to be for everyone.
Very nice. I think you managed to reach the bar that Olu sets. Maria, you're up next.
Well, about a word that I can say transparency relate with genetic engineer, because as Olu said, sometimes the industry want to consider us as, well, stupid persons. Maybe that will help to lose the freight. And a concern will be, in my case, the soil. because if we don't have soil, we still like reducing the natural soil, and that we have a big impact on, as we are already seeing it.
Yes, so like regenerative ag, yes. And Prateek?
I think I would like to see genetic engineering moving towards decentralization. I think that would be my word. That, that just how farmers can do hybrid, plant breeding on their own. I would like to see farmers doing genetic engineering on their own, and, just basically give power to them as well, and not just centralize them to multinational corporations.
Beautiful, thank you so much. And that already sums up our time. My two words, just as I was saying it, that I was thinking, and yes, one of them has come up before, was potential and inclusivity, because I think we need to make sure we include everyone, from the farmer, the scientist, the large multinationals, the smallholders, the public. Everybody needs to be included so they can understand what we are doing. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you guys, and there was a lot in there and many topics that I would love to dive into further. If we were in person, I would not let you go yet, because I would want to find out a lot more. But thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you also to our attendees who are here. We're back with a live session tomorrow. It's a Christine and guests, where she'll be talking to Louisa Burwood-Taylor about farm tech investment. So join us again tomorrow. And thank you so much for being here today and joining us. And we hope to see you on one of our programs soon. Bye.